Thank you all for joining. I really appreciate you coming out to find out about the survey that we did this year. My name is Katie Minich, and I am a biocultural applied anthropologist. So I have a Master of Science in Applied Anthropology from OSU. And I'm also a traditional health worker doula for the state of Oregon. So I've been doing this a long time and just have been studying doulas for about 5 years and practicing almost a decade now. So I've been long interested in all the things that affect our work and kind of the approach for this study. The survey, if you all participated in it, was one of the components of my master's research that I did. And the other two pieces included art-based research, which was really amazing, and that I will share out in some other way. I'm still trying to think through good ways to do that because there was so much amazing artwork and data that we got from that. And also, it was a lot of fun. So we're looking into how we're going to explore sharing those and getting more people involved with it in the future. And also, I did a lot of interviews with doula trainers in the state to ask them what they've noticed over the years and just their insights about sustainability for our profession. So I did share a little bit of an introduction about myself and my work. And the topic for this multimodal study, which means there's more than one modality for the research, is to give a really holistic view of sustainability. So beyond just what you might think of as sustainability, it's also involving imagining things that we might not have even thought of yet, of what a sustainable future could look like for us birth workers. Um, this also was like, went through all of the IRB to make sure it was, ethically sound and everything was anonymous and there was informed consent before people chose to participate in the study on the very front page. And everyone was over the 18 and an Oregon resident. And it was distributed online only through Qualtrics is what we used. And we shared it out through lots of different networks. So through doula trainers with their listservs of students, and ODA shared it on their website. Thank you so much. And social media. The Traditional Health Worker Commission also shared this out, which I was very grateful for. And we just kind of kept it circulating throughout the time that it was open, which was from November 2024 to May of this year. And it was also available in Spanish. So we had 6 folks who completed it in Spanish. And overall, there were 88 total valid surveys, which was really great. And this was all stored in aggregate only to protect everyone's anonymity. And the folks that did enter their emails to be entered for a drawing for a gift card, we just put those separate so we could keep everybody anonymous. And I analyze this data through lots of different ways. So I have a lot of processes that I use when I work with data. So we had qualitative information from the open-ended questions that people could share their thoughts and write things out. And then we had a lot of numerical or quantitative data that we worked with also. So I used RStudio to get those descriptive statistics in here. And then I coded. I use a process called constructivist grounded theory, which sounds really long and crazy, but really what it boils down to is just not coming in there with a preconceived idea of what you might find, which is kind of hard if you've been doing the work. You might have some ideas of what you might see in the data. So trying to let it, as the surveys were coming in, I was coding that qualitative data um, to create a narrative instead of coming in with questions of like, I think this is going to be a category, that's going to be a category. So it's constructivist in the sense that it is co-created with all the people who are providing that information and sharing it with me. And then it's getting shared with all of us now. So it's kind of a process and it's ongoing. But from those, I found there were 3 main themes and about 8 sub-themes that I'll get to with that qualitative data. So the first thing we'll look at is the socio-demographics. So that's just like your demographic data, but in a social context. So out of all of the people who shared their thoughts through the survey, only one said that they were retired. And they said they wanted an income that was easier on their body, which makes total sense and usually why people retire in the first place. Six people said they were taking a break from doing doula work, and many of them shared that it was because of family obligations or wanting to go to school, finish school, or having a job that wasn't compatible with being on call. So those were the main reasons people said they were taking a break. Um, Everyone else that completed the survey was actively taking clients. And as you can see here on the left, we had an average age and a median age that were pretty close between 41 and 42. So that's kind of our sample of doulas. That's our average age is about a 41 or 42-year-old person. But there was a standard deviation, so that means when you put all the data together, you can see like it is kind of built out in about 10-year increments, which shows that we have representation from like every generation, which is really amazing. We have elders and we have young people, and it's a pretty steady representation of people doing the work across our state, which I find really cool. These two charts here show how people identified with their gender and then also about their relationship status. And this is really great because we worked a lot with the survey and we tested it a lot before we put it out to think of the best ways to give people a lot of choice. And I think it was Rabin from ODA who was saying it makes sense. We want to give people a lot of choice because that's what doulas do. We love to give people choices and let them, decide. So I did this also with gender. So things like gender and ethnic or racial backgrounds on surveys tend to be like you pick one box. And so for this, I wanted to allow people to explore all their complicated and nuanced identities. So as you can see here, a lot of people chose multiple representations of their gender, and we did have one man complete the survey, so one male doula, and we did have some non-binary people. So there is a little bit of diversity, even though the majority of people who completed the survey identified as women or cisgendered. And with relationship status, very few of the respondents of the survey were unpartnered. And I think that kind of builds into the narrative of it really takes a lot of support to do doula work, especially if you have a family and children. So it really helps to have those partners. But also, we need to think about the folks who don't have partners doing the work and how the community can step in and provide them that support doing this really important community service. Once again, with this, I allowed people to choose multiple identities here, and some folks did choose other. And the people who did, they wrote in their answers as they described themselves as Middle Eastern, and then also one person said they were Mexican American. So that was cool to see how people really detailed out their identities. And when people are allowed the option to choose more than one identity, we really see there's a lot of biracial, multiracial folks who see themselves as more multifaceted than a checkbox can really describe. So which is actually really heartening to see that the diversity is happening within the doula workforce, although like slow but steady. So we're seeing some of that diversity. And the bottom right table shows the breakdown of folks who chose more than one identity because I wanted to um, give them space to highlight their unique identities. And so while there wasn't anyone who identified only as Native American or Alaskan Native, many folks were biracial or multiracial, with that being one of their identities. And I think that really speaks to our colonial history and just how nuanced and multifaceted people's backgrounds are in the United States. And even in our state, which is kind of known as not being super diverse, we still see a lot of unique identities here. Okay. So the education one was really interesting because doulas are consistently having really great representation in higher education. So even though we don't need a degree to do our work, I think a lot of folks decide to go back to school to learn more. And so that's a really common narrative. So out of our sample here, we have a higher rate of a 4-year or more degrees. than the state's average. So while it's not as high as like maybe Portland Metro, where there's highly educated folks, we have among doulas a really educated group of folks. But I wanted to also highlight that where you live and your background really plays into your attainment of higher education. So we need to always put that in a spotlight there to keep in mind how to support all learners. And this is a breakdown of where all of the respondents live. So we're not surprised to see Portland Metro has, high representation because that's where all of or most of our population is. But it's nice to see representation from some smaller areas too, and how that's growing over time. And so for this section, it's all about training. So we looked at what training programs folks had taken, and people wrote them in. And so from that aggregate, I broke it down into categories. As you can see, over a third of people have taken multiple doula trainings, which is not surprising if you're doing the work. People are always getting continued ed, or maybe they need to change their philosophy on training or need to learn some different things. And also, Oregon has the approved trainings to be a traditional health worker, which also played into most of these being those trainings, right? We still see some folks from Birthing Way when they were still open, so they were still represented in the sample. Um, but the majority, I would say, or a good chunk of them are DONA or multiple trainings. But yeah, good to see a representation from SMC, CEA Doula, Community Doula Program, Community Doula Alliance, and Doula Training Center in there. And only 3 people who completed the survey said they didn't take a formal training, which we also have to acknowledge a lot of people do the work without, taking formal training, and it is a traditional role that people have held. We asked folks how many births they've attended in total, so their whole career. And we had a range of folks who just started, so they hadn't attended a birth yet, to a person who had 1,200 births under their belt, which is a really big range. But with those numbers, we had an average about 77 was what folks had attended over their careers. And here also you see these 2 charts showing the availability of mentorship after their training was taken and how folks paid for training. So a big difference from the 2018 survey, which we kind of loosely based these questions off of to update the information about the workforce years later. We really were curious of how people were being supported with their training. And as you can see, a significant portion had received scholarships for their training. And these are from DHS or other Medicaid CCOs, community organizations that funded people to go through training. And we had folks write them in, and I found it really interesting that a lot of folks weren't sure who paid for their training. Some folks wrote the training organization, and while some training organizations do offer in-house scholarships, a lot of the funding comes from another organization and is given to a training organization to sponsor students. And I think that shows that there's some confusion around where funding sources may have come from based on people's answers. So that's something to think about too. And mentorship, um, many people want mentorship post-training, and as you can see, around half said that they could get mentorship post-training, but it came at a cost. So many folks might not get mentorship if they don't have the funds. Say, for example, if they got scholarship for their training, but then aren't able to access mentorship because of the costs associated. So that's something to really think about in the future, because consistently throughout time, doulas have expressed wanting mentorship. And so we need to think creatively about how we can work on providing that to new students. Okay, workforce. So this map represents the representation of counties that the respondents of the surveys shared that they covered. So we can see here the kind of tan color is like Portland Metro, and that has the highest number of folks serving it. Once again, not surprising with the population being so large there. And then also we have a pretty good chunk in Lane, And that kind of earth-colored tone in Lynn County shows a pretty good representation. But the pink colors are the areas that we know there's doulas there, but maybe they didn't take the survey, and maybe they still really are fewer. So this is similar to the 2018 where we know there's folks out there doing it, um, but maybe they're not being represented in the research, and we should think about how to really do boots on the ground work to really find out who's providing services and letting their voice be heard through research. And I did want to note that while we see that whole area of Eastern Oregon being covered, it was said to be covered by only one person of the survey. So we have to take that with a grain of salt and wonder if really there is representation being seen from one person in that way. So traditional health workers, the really big thing from this compared to 2018 was that the statistics here kind of flopped, like flip-flopped. Um, so the 2018 only had less than 20% were THWs at that time, and now it's the opposite, where a very few aren't traditional health workers or in the process of becoming one. So it's an over 90% increase. We had around 40 people in the 2018 study that were traditional health workers, and now we have almost 500. So that's a really big increase. And also the question about certification, we asked folks to write who they were certified with if they were. And once again, I think it really shows the confusion that most people have around certification, because each organization that offers certification, um, they have different pathways to do that, right? And different requirements. So the one respondent wrote that they thought they were certified because they completed their training. But that once again shows like there's a lot of things that need to happen for most training organization bodies to offer the certification to someone. Um, but with that being said, the um, the most likely certification people wrote were traditional health workers. So they really are looking to become traditional health workers, whereas in the past, people were focusing on like certifying with an organization like DONA or Pro Doula. So it's really kind of shifted a culture here in Oregon in that respect. And I did want to say too, people were writing in, some of the responses had organizations that don't offer certification. So I think once again, there's still a lot of confusion from the public, from providers, from hospitals, and from doulas themselves about what certification is and what it means and how to get it. Um, and the other hopeful thing here was that there weren't a lot of claims paid in 2018, and there was a lot of discontent and strife around getting claims paid, which we still have. But out of all the numbers of claims people wrote in that they've been paid for their services, we had over 1,000. So the average was about 28 claims paid per person. That was a THW, which is amazing compared to 2018 when less than 20% had had one claim paid. So good news, folks. And this one, I wanted to find out if people were still doing this as a secondary job or if they considered it their primary career. And there was a 10% increase from 2018 of folks saying this was their main job. This is their livelihood. So I think that speaks to the reimbursement rate and things just improving over time and people being more aware of doulas now, that it allows people to do it as their primary career. The income, we still had 21% of folks who did the survey who had not received income yet. And this is significant, but we still had the majority of folks were being paid for their services. And the average there is about 21,800, which, I mean, it's not a livable wage by any means, but compared to 2018, most people had under 10,000 as their annual income. So it is getting better. Yay. We saw a huge range though in these income ranges. So we had folks who had zero, as I mentioned, and then we had some folks who were making 70,000, which is kind of rare, but they're still out there. Um, yeah, really good stuff. We also focused on asking what their second job was, and there were so many responses. I will share the report once it's just finalized, that has all the juicy details in there of all the things people do. But there's a lot of gig workers, so like Uber drivers and Door Dashers, things like that, that they could be flexible with, which makes sense when you're on call. A lot of massage therapists, that we had a loctician who does dreadlocks for people, photographers, teachers, childhood educators, all kinds of things. So we have a really big representation of doulas doing many things. Um, and we also asked what they did that was related to doula work. So if they volunteered or worked in another reproductive health centered profession. And a lot of folks said that they volunteered for different things. So maybe they're doing advocacy or policy work. Maybe they're doing work as a home visitor or working in domestic violence shelters or as birth assistants, becoming midwives maybe. And a lot of folks also mentioned that they're working around harm reduction and substance use disorder, which is a really growing need in our state and our nation, which is great to hear that people are either cross-training as peers or working in different modalities to support people going through substance use disorder. And we also asked folks in the survey if they provided culturally or linguistically matched care. And it did increase from 2018 with the amount of people that said they did. So we had around 40% of folks taking the survey saying, yes, I do provide something very specific to my community. And many of these were Spanish-speaking families, substance use disorder, once again, and a lot of BIPOC groups, and then also folks that said they worked with rural populations. So not only culturally, linguistically matched care as doulas, but also there was a lot of representation of people who were providing experience-based care. So they have been through it themselves. They're familiar with that community and those experiences, and they're providing care to others who are going through it, which is great. This was the weird question, and it was one of my favorite findings because we asked folks how they practice as a doula. And as you know, if you're a doula or doula adjacent, there's so many ways to work. So people were writing them in sometimes, and a lot of people were unhappy because we gave multiple choices to most questions on the survey. But because I wanted to do a comparative study with practice modalities, we only allowed one. And a lot of people were happy because they say, well, I'm an independent contractor and I work in an agency and I do this other stuff too. So it was hard to quantify. But from all those different modalities, I grouped those responses in by type just to generalize, and we can see a comparison. And so there's two questions. One was, how do you currently practice? And the second one was, how would you like to practice? And so as you can see here, there's an increase in a desire of doulas to work collectively. So maybe they want to work in a hub or an agency or a collective with other folks. And there was also an increase in people that wanted to be an employee in some way. So getting an hourly wage or a salary rather than just working as an independent contractor only. And we also saw a decrease in folks that wanted to work solo, which I know as doulas we value our autonomy and our individuality. But I think this kind of suggests that there's a drive to want to work more collectively when we can as doulas, which makes sense with the qualitative data that we'll look at in a minute that really supports that. And the folks that worked for nonprofits stayed the same. And the hospital-based doulas, we saw a little decrease in that preference there, which is also significant. This one was also really fun. We asked folks what type of doula they are, and they could choose multiple things. And from that, I made a word cloud to show the size of the words is correlated with the number of responses. And it's interesting to look at because while most people identified as a birth doula, almost everyone identified with multiple other things besides that. So only 5 people in total said, I am only a birth doula, which is really interesting. And then the second biggest word here is traditional health workers. So that really, once again, showcases how doulas in Oregon are really seeing themselves as traditional health workers almost more than they are just a birth labor doula traditionally. So that's a big cultural shift for us in the state. And there's lots of other things. The people who wrote in wrote in that they were abortion doulas or worked with substance use disorder specifically. Um, and I included this quote because there's a pushback on the word doula. So this respondent said they really don't like the word doula because it's referring to a female slave or servant, and they would prefer something else like a birthing companion or birth keeper. So that's notable too to see that shift away from, yes, people know what a doula is now and they're familiar with the word, but also we know what that word means, and maybe we're wanting to shift away from that as an identifier for ourselves and our work. Okay, qualitative. Um, so the first main theme, so the most frequent type of comment that we got from the survey was around pay, but I didn't want to categorize it as pay only because it was more specifically referring to a living wage. So people making enough to actually support themselves, their family, and pay their bills rather than just their rate or total pay that they were receiving. And from this, there was two sub-themes, which was financial independence, so not having to rely on multiple jobs unless they wanted to, or partners or family to provide enough income for them. And then another main sub-theme here was that people talked a lot about just being paid timely. So if they're waiting for a claim to come in from services they provided to a Medicaid client, if that came in a timely manner, it would make a huge difference to people. There were a lot of folks too who talked about the traditional health worker program and process in general. A lot of folks saying if it was more streamlined and easier, it would make their life better, which is not surprising to many of us here. But we have been making a lot of progress too. And here's a lot of quotes that I captured. There's many more in the full report. People speaking to how it's really hard to be on call and have a second job, which makes a lot of sense. So if you're trying to make up that gap in your income, it can be really challenging and limiting with the types of work you can do. And also people speaking to how there is still that expectation of doing births for free to gain experience, to either get on the traditional health worker registry or to become certified through an organization. They often require births attended. And a lot of times this can be hard on people when they're not getting compensated for their time. And just kind of a pushback on that expectation that because we're doing care work that it should be expected and freely given. Um, and this person here also was talking about how they're taking less clients so that they can have more time to do billing, which is a shame, right? And as we know, the cost of living and inflation is just skyrocketing. So it's really hard to make enough money for most people these days to support their livelihoods. So it's something to keep in mind when we're looking at sustainability for doulas. And the second most frequent theme that was identified from these comments was having the right number of clients. And there was no magic number of what that was, which really speaks to each person having a different capacity, time, energy, and ability to serve people. So we had some folks saying 1 client a month would be great. Some people said 4. That was pretty common, like 2 to 4 a month was considered the ideal number. And a couple people had higher numbers, though they were less frequent. And I kind of put in this category the sub-theme of health because it speaks to people's ability to take on that much work. This person here was speaking to sustainability being enough money or ability for them to seek services to better their health and well-being, such as massage, acupuncture, being able to afford food that was going to support their health, sleep disruptions, having enough time to sleep after having clients. I don't know if any of you have had back-to-back births. Those are really hard. Um, so this other comment too is talking about how much, they love being a doula, but as we age, it gets harder and harder on our bodies, and they can't imagine not doing it, but wanting to really preserve their health in the process. And the third most frequent theme that we got from the survey was having a good work-life balance, which is very complicated and individualized of what that means. So some folks spoke to being able to have enough time to do things they enjoy and have time with their family, which is always a struggle. I know if you've been called away, like to a birth at your child's birthday party or during a holiday, it's kind of tough sometimes. Or being able to schedule a vacation, which is really challenging being on call. So some of these comments really just also talked about their motivation and their community being very important. So those two sub-themes spoke to having a doula community that was non-judgmental and non-competitive, to really have good backup and community support from each other, debriefing. All these things are very important in our work, and they can't be understated. Um, and a lot of people too are just talking about how this is the best job to have. They feel privileged and honored to do this work. So sometimes the motivation of remembering why you got into the work um, can really help carry you through. And so these were the other sub-themes. So there was a lot of comments that spoke to different things. Some people spoke about still having problems with access, which is discouraging. We saw during the pandemic a lot of restrictions, but it's still happening in a lot of places where there are restrictions for doulas to serve their clients in different spaces. So that's something we still have to grapple with and work towards making it better. And folks also talked a lot about autonomy, like really valuing their freedom to practice how they want, and be able to work in different spaces and in different modalities, as we saw with the types of practice. So people really value that about being a doula, is just their autonomy. And something that really warmed my heart a lot was so many comments that were just, there was two questions. So one was, what does sustainability look like to you? And the second one was, is there anything else you'd like to share? And many of those comments were just people being grateful and very happy that this research was happening. And so I think that really speaks to doulas might be kind of burnt out and tired of being researched, but it's also good to have their voices being central in the research, which is really important. The 2018 study was also done by a doula anthropologist, so I feel like I was stepping into someone's shoes and continuing a tradition of leading this research from a place of an insider and someone who knows the work and is really committed to their community. Um, so let's keep that going, and let's let doulas be more centralized in research. And I think this looks like participatory research in the future, and really community-based pockets of on-the-ground work, and just a lot more collaboration that needs to happen. This person said, it's not sustainable right now, but I really want it to be. So I think that was another consistent thing that showed up, is, people being more hopeful and really loving what they do, but just recognizing the real challenges that we still face in our work. And this I just want to hover on for a minute, and I'm not going to read them. I'll let you all just look at them. So these were the recommendations that were given at the end of the 2018 study that was done on the doula workforce. And as you can see, there's a couple things that have improved, and there's some things that have really not. So things take time. I think what stood out to me was, yes, we did see an increase in reimbursement, which is great, but we still haven't addressed a lot of the infrastructure that needs to be supported. So these are just things we're still grappling with. And I didn't want to say for sure like what things have been met, what things haven't been met, because I think that's very variable depending on where you live, and your experiences and your background. So I think it's more complicated than just saying, yes, check that off the list. But it's good to reflect 7 years later of the progress we've made, and the things that we could still be working on together. And these are just some discussion points that I pulled out of this. I had a lot of data from all of the research that I did over the last 2 years specifically. But what really comes through from the survey specifically is doulas just want to have their basic needs met. They don't want to be billionaires. They don't want to be wealthy. They just want to be able to support their lives while they're serving others. And that means a living wage and possibly access to benefits, right? And there is a finding of wanting to work more collaboratively. Doula work traditionally was like you become your own business and you have many other people in your area that have their own business, and you might back each other up, you might refer, you might not, you might have a contentious relationship. But I think we need to rethink how that traditional doula model that was based on private pay clients is now shifting towards insurance-based, providing matched care in your community, and how that differs. And sustainability means many things besides just pay. It means support from your community, support from providers and systems. It means representation in research, right? Passion for the work, and a good like work-life balance, and having access to as many clients as is right for you to take on without being a detriment to yourself and your health. And the big thing too is there's so many more doulas that are traditional health workers now. We've seen a huge increase, so our workforce is really growing. And now's the time to really invest in infrastructure and support for them now that they're here, right? Let's support the people doing the work. And once again, as many of us know, birth work is not a monolith. It's not usually the only facet of someone's personality or their career. Almost everyone has many different roles in their community that they fulfill. And so doulas are kind of like a jumping off point to advocacy in the community or caring for families in different modalities. So we shouldn't look at it as a 9 to 5 with a turnover rate, an attrition rate. We should look at it as a flexible, fluid pathway that is based off a traditional role throughout time, and that people come in and out of as their life allows. And sometimes they shift into different work, and that's okay. Thank you so much to the folks who supported this research, HealthShare of Oregon, ODA, who trusted me to lead this research. I'm very humbled and grateful. And Oregon State University, who also supported me, my PI, Dr. Melissa Cheney, and my whole lab, the Uplift Lab, were very supportive of everything I did. And I feel very grateful to have been able to lead this work. So thank you all so much.